Hello and welcome into the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here after the Toronto Blue Jays Game 1 loss in the ALCS to the Seattle Mariners. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, it is the first series deficit the Blue Jays have faced this year after racing out to a big lead over the New York Yankees. And it was a pretty underwhelming game, all things considered. A 3-1 loss. They only string together 2 hits. And the biggest drama point from the game was essentially, did Kevin Gausman get pulled too early? But we've had many of those conversations over the past couple of years.
I think coming in, the electricity maybe was kind of slow to get there because, it wasn't the Yankees. It wasn't, who you had spent the whole year building up to trying to beat. And so you beat them. There's the emotional, explosion from that. And so it takes a little while for things to kind of get rolling. But then, they bring out Encarnacion. They bring out the giant flag. Everyone's getting hyped up. It's coming. It's coming. It's here. It's game one. It's exciting. They get through the first inning. Springer homers. And it's the building's, shaking. It's vibrating. And then they muster one hit the rest of the ball game. And the energy levels, I'm sure you'll be able to speak to this given that you were in the building covering the game for Sportsnet. But at least through the television, it kind of seemed a little like a
Yeah,
not the most enticing game, and unfortunately, the Jays are now down 1-0 to the Mariners in the series.
a little behind the scenes. I mean, I was rocking the AirPods with the the sound cancellation. And like, wow, credit to those things because they did incredibly well in that crowd. There was a couple times where, Springer homer, a couple big Gosman Ks where like the crowd would come through, but credit to the AirPods, man. They if you need to get zoned in a crowd of 40,000 people, the AirPods are the right call. So I mean, I guess we can kind of start beginning of the game as we go through here. Obviously, first inning kind of shapes up to be a little bit scary. Rally singles, Julio singles, and then that pushes Cal to third. And then, of course, first and third one out, and they're able to kind of get the runner at the plate, which kind of settles everything down. And then, I mean, this the Springer homer, like dude was hunting that pitch. I think Arden Zwelling had the tweet where it said, I think it's 79% of the time Bryce Miller opens a game with a fastball, and 73% of the time they're in the zone. So George Springer had the scouting report. He was ready to go. The first postseason leadoff homer in Blue Jays history. Very cool. I mean, the building just the roof came off it for that one. But yeah, like you said, they obviously slow down after that and just the one hit from there. But I mean, before we kind of get into the offense, I guess we can kind of start with Springer there. You mentioned it as you think he's due for a big series, and that's like a big step for him. And if this team is going to get where they want to go, Springer kind of has to be a large part of that, even though he wasn't in the division series against the Yankees.
Yeah, he's definitely going to have to be a larger part. And even today, only has the one hit. Mind you, it's the long ball, and that's what you're really looking for from him. But they're going to need contributions up and down the lineup for sure. But especially now with the news that Bo Bichette not in the picture, not on the
Yeah.
roster, which we actually hadn't touched on in our preview because it all seemed pretty much a foregone conclusion he would be on the roster. It becomes a situation where they need 1 through 9 once again to contribute. And that becomes problematic because they're just today, a game like today. I mean, really, nobody did anything offensively, but it was a case of a lot of weak contact, a lot of pop outs, a lot of not even a lot of swing and miss. It was only 3 walks, 3 strikeouts for Miller. He just had them kind of putting balls in play and made quick work of them after 27 pitch first inning, only finished with about 75 pitches through 6 innings. They didn't make him work, and as a result, the Mariners were basically let off the hook in a game where it should have been the Mariners were scrambling to find pitching.
Yeah, and it almost was, right? Like the Blue Jays kind of had him on the ropes in that first inning. Springer homers, Lucas works the walk after fouling a ball off his knee. Barger walks, and then they go fly out, line out. And after the game, Mariners manager Dan Wilson said that he was considering getting the bullpen up in that first inning. So, could you imagine you get an extra hit in that situation, and Seattle goes to their bullpen in the first inning rather than, letting Miller settle in. Where I think it was, yeah, like you said, 27 pitches in the first, and then like it was like 27 pitches for the next three innings or something like that. Like it was he just kind of went on cruise control. One thing, that was interesting was he kind of started pretty heavy, like fastball in that first inning, and then after that he kind of went kitchen sink where I think he ended up throwing seven different pitch types in the game. So he did have a little bit of the adrenaline boost. The velo was playing up. This was a little bit more classic, not classic, but like 2024 Bryce Miller than 2025. And for the Blue Jays offensively, I mean, it just kind of felt like they kept on lining out and lining out and lining out, and not really being able to get anything in the air, a lot of ground balls. As far as like if you want to look at like the XBA war, I mean, the Blue Jays had a higher XBA in the game than the Mariners did, right? So I think, if you're looking for positives to take away from the game, it's that they didn't get dominated by Bryce Miller. They let him off the hook a little bit by not getting it deep into counts. They got a little bit unlucky with their batted balls, and they just kind of seemed maybe a little overeager in their at-bats.
Yeah, I think the overeagerness is going to be a really interesting through line to keep tabs on. Just given the propensity for the Mariners to fill up the zone. This isn't a team that really walks all that many guys. And in part, that's because their pitching staff is so elite at locating. But on the whole, they're not a team that's necessarily going to blow you away beyond maybe on just Munoz. And even him, he's still I don't even think did he even have a strikeout? He may have struck out one guy, but he's not out there throwing, 100, anything like that, right? Something that I saw also on Twitter that I think is really interesting, just on the Bryce Miller point. This is from Ben Resnick on Twitter. Bryce Miller on the season versus righties, 38% four seam fastball, 24% sinker. Blue Jays on righty versus righty sinkers this year, plus 19 run value. That was the best in the majors. Naturally, he ups the sinker usage, borderline ditches the fastball, and holds Toronto righties to zero hits after the first pitch. Baseball. Yeah, that was super interesting that I mean, evidently the sinker was working for him and he was generating a ton of soft contact as a result.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we can kind of get into the Kevin Gausman thing, but obviously it's a talking point out there whether Gausman was pulled too early because he comes out of the game in the sixth again after kind of running into some trouble. But at the end of the day, like they lost 3-1, right? Like you have to score more runs in the postseason, and especially in this game one scenario where you had this team coming in, in theory, completely gassed from their 15 inning game on Friday night. And, it felt like an advantage to really kind of stick it to them early in the series. And you drop that game, which is certainly disappointing. And I think, I'm kind of getting it. Like neither of us are probably sitting here like pressing the panic button right now because it's a 7 game series. It's game one. Like they have time to make it up. But I certainly would say that if they lose the series, that you're going to come back and look at this game as a big missed opportunity just to
An
set the tone.
enormous missed opportunity for sure. And I think it's going to be incumbent on the Jays to come out tomorrow and go out there with their ace swings. And if they're going to put the bat on the ball like they did today, again, you know, Kevin Gausman generated more whiffs than Bryce Miller did for much of the game. May have even finished with more whiffs on the game.
He did 10-8.
Exactly. So, to me, the Jays were still putting bat on ball. They were still doing what they do best, but they weren't finding holes in the defense, obviously, which there's only so much you can do about that. And they weren't making quality contact. I think of Vlad pounding the ball into the dirt, probably in all four plate appearances. And he hit the ball hard a couple times. I think he hit one 105 plus, either to start the game or in a second AB. Like he was still hitting balls hard, but if you're hitting him into the dirt, you can't do damage. And the Jays did far too much of either pop outs into, no man's land and just lazy fly balls or, the occasional ground out. There was maybe one or two line drives that maybe should have fallen for a hit. I think of the Randy Rosarena catch on
Yeah.
Alejandro Kirk in the seventh inning that probably would have gone for a hit against the New York Yankees. But it's just at that point, you've got to find a way to find holes, obviously, but more important than that, you've got to find a way to make more quality contact. And the Jays just didn't make enough quality contact.
All right, let's do the Gausman thing. Second straight postseason start for him where he's cruising through 5 innings and then kind of runs into some trouble in the sixth. And so obviously, comes out in the sixth, gets a ground out, gets Randy to strike out, and then, Cal homers. And it's kind of like, well, that was it's Cal rally. So I mean, that's it's gonna happen.
It's Cal Raleigh against the Blue Jays, specifically against Kevin Gausman. It was always going to happen tonight.
And then, they go from Cal and then he walks Julio and then they decide to bring in Brendan Little. And, Brendan Little being Brendan Little, uncorks a wild pitch like pretty quick.
Almost uncorks two of them. Kirk
Yeah.
has to
Yeah,
make a
Kirk had a
beauty
really
glove
good block.
save.
Yeah. And then of course, 2 outs and Polanco singles home the ultimately the winning run, which, was put into scoring position by the wild pitch. I think Gausman looked really good through five, right? Like the first inning, couple base hits, but really worked out of that. And then, kind of just started cruising. The splitter was on, and it was, kind of vintage Kevin Gausman, like the guy that there was a reason why he's starting game one, and it's because he can look like that, right? So the homer, the walk, like I kind of get it. Like Polanco has better splits against lefties. So going to Little, I mean, after the game, Schneider said that he wanted like some more swing and miss, and Gausman kind of lost that. So I mean, I kind of get that, but I feel like maybe you should go to one of your righties in that situation because Polanco is worse has been worse against righties. I mean, it's like an 802 OPS compared to an 888 or whatever. But I think like if you go to Sir Anthony Dominguez, right? Like if you're going to be so aggressive with Dominguez against the Yankees. Like, why not in that scenario where, you have a runner on and it's tied?
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And the other thing that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, beyond obviously the quick hook on Gausman, which, I understand in the postseason you can't really let guys figure it out. You kind of always have to have your guys throw in their best stuff, and if they're not, you got to pull the shoot pretty quickly. But even at that, throughout the postseason, you know, to me, Brendan Little has not been the Blue Jays' number one lefty since about July, and they continue to deploy him as such. I'm not understanding what the reluctance is to give Mason Fluharty or even Eric Lauer to that degree those lefty opportunities. Yes, they don't necessarily have the swing and miss stuff, although Fluharty's lately really been showing a lot of that.
Well, he went
But
he went 2 outs, 2 Ks today.
exactly. So to me, I don't understand this reluctance to give Mason Fluharty some of these gigs.
Yeah, I mean it's probably a little bit of like the track record. Like they're, Little has like kind of been better because when he started like mixing in the cutter as a pitch he's gonna throw for a strike. But at the end of the day, I feel like in that scenario where you just you have a guy who's better against lefties. So you're bringing in a lefty. And I don't know if like Naylor behind them was scaring them. Like I just feel like, let Gausman pitch to Polanco, and then if Polanco reaches or whatever, then go to Fluharty or Little for Naylor, right? Because there's your lefty matchup with 2 outs. But it did seem like a little shocking that he did pull him in that scenario where there was 2 outs and one guy on, and it just kind of felt like, Cal Raleigh hits a homer. It's not, the biggest red flag in the world, I would
Well,
say.
even at that, he had just struck out Randy Rosarena. It just felt like they
Yeah.
really pulled the shoot really fast. I mean, he homered on a two strike count. Like it's not like Gosman wasn't in a position to put him away. I think it may have even been a full count, right? Like this was
2-2.
it was a 2-2 count. Like this was not a situation where Gosman was losing his stuff per se. It feels like he still had his at least, if not his A stuff, his A minus stuff. If you want to get so specific, like it just felt a little bit panicky and a little bit of a case of action bias in the case of John Schneider, which he's been known to do every once in a while, right? So I don't know. I mean, to me, listen, the Gosman decision ultimately results in them giving up the lead. But 3 runs is nothing if not or rather is nothing if not doable for
Yeah.
this offense.
Yeah.
2 hits is extremely uncharacteristic. It's the fewest hits they've ever had in a postseason game. Like this is a once in a decade type of postseason collapse from the offense. I'd expect some positive regression almost from the Jays tomorrow, but even at that, it falls on the offense to get it done, and they fail to do so.
Yeah. As much as if you as much as you want to complain about the Gausman thing, I mean, Little did come in and at least get out of the inning with, without giving up like any of his own runs. And there's like this stats tweet where it's like he's, allowed 40% of his inherited runners to score since August 26th or something like that. Not exactly what you want, but yeah. I think, you look at the offense. I saw a stat that the Mariners threw more sliders in game five of the ALDS than they threw pitches tonight.
I mean, obviously 15 innings, but like you got to make them work at least a little bit, man.
Yeah.
You gotta make them work at least a little bit.
As far as like, I mean, any other concerns pop up for you? Dominguez is outing, a little shaky, couple walks, gives up the hit, gives up, the extra run there. It's funny because like when you watch this Blue Jays team, like if you've watched them all year, you kind of do feel like they haven't really been out of a lot of games. But it kind of seemed like as, Spire, Brash, and Munoz came in, it seemed like they didn't necessarily like have kind of that juice coming up against those
Yeah,
guys.
they just weren't kind of generating competitive at bats. There was nothing in the way of, it would be pop out here. Like they never really put pressure on the Mariners really once after the Springer homer, right? I mean, obviously Santander gets on, but that's it. That's all she wrote. You're you need your team. You need your guys, obviously Vladdy, but just in general, you need everybody to be contributing. You need Alejandro Kirk to turn it up. Other than those first two games at the Dome against the Yankees, he's kind of actually slowed down a little bit here. You need contributions from everybody one through nine, and they just did not get that in any way, shape, or form. And part of that is again batted ball luck. Two balls, landing for hits, one of them being a homer, right? It's the,
And
the
when they
BABIP gods were not on the Jays side.
two hits when you only strike out four times, like that's, you put how many balls did they put in play today? It would be
Probably 20 plus.
25 balls in play and two of them fell for hits. Like that's just unlucky.
It's just some of that's poor fortune. Some of that, listen, some of that is popping up to Jorge Polanco a couple times and a couple
Yeah.
cans of corns to J-Rod,
Yeah.
in center field. But it's just, I think it takes the wind out of your sails, I think is the best way I could put it.
Yeah, for
The Jays
sure.
come in with so much momentum, so much excitement, and to basically fall flat on their face for game one, they're gonna have to come out with a lot more energy for game two, for sure. 100%.
Yeah, so I mean, the kind of narrative around game two is interesting now because obviously a lot of stuff happened today and yesterday with the Blue Jays roster. And of course, Trey Savage comes out today and kind of drops a bombshell about his family like getting hate online, which is kind of crazy. Obviously he's 22-year-old who dominates the Yankees to have to feel the need to do that. Like it must be pretty bad, right? Let's start there. You Savage, I mean, for you, like kind of seeing that come out. I mean, what was kind of your thought? I mean, it's I don't think that there's really a ton that you can take away from it other than people need to be better people online. But
I think you kind of put it best there. It's obviously it's not what you want to see, obviously. It goes without saying. Um, it's tough, right? You want fans to be passionate and you want excitement, but that's just crossing so many lines. It's so unnecessary. And I was surprised that something got said, right? I actually personally hadn't seen a lot of stuff, in the Savage comment sections or anything like that, on his Instagram or anything of the sort. Um, but yeah, like you said, it clearly was an issue if he unprompted kind of brought it up.
yeah. Yep. Big game for him tomorrow though, going up against Logan Gilbert. Obviously Gilbert coming back on short rest as well. I was kind of surprised that it wasn't Castillo, but I do wonder like a little blood in the water feeling for the Mariners that are like, hey, if we can get out of here with a 2-0 lead in the series, like we'll feel very good about that. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, Why not Brian Wu? That's what I'm not understanding. Where is
Yeah,
Brian Wu?
that's a good point too. Is he a decoy for the series? Is he kind of the lurking boogeyman that the Blue Jays don't want to face, but they're never going
I don't
to?
know. I don't know, man. I don't know. But I think with the Savage, I was texting a friend and he asks me, "Is this a must-win game?" And just a gotta win or is it a must-win? And I'm of the opinion it's somewhere kind of in the middle. It's I wouldn't call it a must-win, but it's going to be a big ask to take 2 out of 3 in Seattle. So you'd rather go to Seattle 1-1. You really really rather go 2-0. But I think at bare minimum you want to go 1-1. And this team again is more than capable of clawing back from a 2-0 deficit. But to me, I just think that it's critical that the offense, more than anything else, the offense shows up in game two.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it in our series preview, right? Like we kind of talked about the lurking factor of T-Mobile Park in the series, and now you're looking at it and what's lurking there. It's Brian Wu, it's George Kirby, it's Luis Castillo. Like, Wu, all-star pitcher, and Kirby and Castillo, who have been excellent at home this year. And what did today kind of show you? It's the Mariners' blueprint for beating the Blue Jays, right? Where they need to completely kind of snuff out their offense, and for them to kind of do that, obviously huge for them and a problem that the Blue Jays need to fix. So I think you go into tomorrow against Gilbert and like you said, not a must win. I mean, I probably as close to a must win as you can get in a non-elimination game, right? But um, yeah, I think really really important for them to win tomorrow.
It is going to be a case of if it's a low scoring, grind it out win, it's probably going to be for the Mariners, and if it's a slug the ball out of the yard kind of game, it's going to be the Jays.
Yeah,
And it's going to be a case of the Jays are going to have to make use of the power that they have that in some cases, outside of Cal Raleigh has been hit or miss at times for the Mariners. Obviously, they do have power and guys like a Rosarena, guys like J-Rod, guys like excuse me, like Polanco. Like, they do have these sluggers, but the Jays with Vladdy, with Varsho, with Springer, like they have, I think, just a little bit more juice. And Vladdy and Raleigh are going to be the trump cards, and it's going to be a matter of almost to an extent who is the bigger factor. And in game one it was Raleigh. We'll see if Vladdy can answer back in game two.
yeah. Yeah. Other things kind of pop up. The Nathan Lucas thing obviously leaves the game early. Kind of hurts the top of their lineup because Lucas comes in and fills that spot. Or sorry, not Lucas was the one who left. Straw comes in and fills that spot. Not the bat that you want there. And of course, later in the game, they pinch hit for Straw with Schneider, and it's kind of interesting when you look at the way that their bench is built, right? Because your lefty pinch hitters, like you. They didn't really have any on the bench to go to because Santander was in the lineup, Barger was in the lineup, Varsho was in the lineup. All those guys are in there. So, if Lucas isn't able to play tomorrow, and I think he's a pretty significant bat for you to be able to at least like have in there against this trove of Mariners lefty starters. And if say that they have to replace Lucas, I mean, I don't think that Loperfido is joining the lineup and immediately going into your two hole.
Yeah, like if the Mariners are going to be throwing righty after righty at you, then you're going to have to use Nathan Lucas pretty heavily. There was word after the game from John Schneider that the MRI came back clean, so
Yeah.
the hope is he's in the lineup tomorrow. But what percentage is he going to be at? That's a tough ball to take off the knee with, as Buck Martinez was saying, no protection.
Yeah.
That's going to severely hamper him at least defensively.
Pretty impressive that he goes from that foul ball to working a 12 pitch walk. I thought it was pretty funny that he's down obviously on the ground there, and then he comes back and Bryce Miller's like, "Hey, here's a fastball down the middle, right at like as hard as I can, right after you were on the ground dealing with that."
Yeah, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean that's baseball. Yeah, I mean, obviously, probably not as, much meat on this game to get into for us as, the all the ALDS games, so not as much to not as long as of an episode, but I mean, you got anything else? I think, we did Gausman, did the lineup, did Lucas, I mean, the bullpen, Little, obviously, Dominguez, Varland was good, Fluharty was good, Hoffman was solid. I mean, anybody else that really stood out to you? I mean,
In a word, no.
yeah,
Listen, I mean, Vladdy said it post game. Flush it. You got to flush it. Come back tomorrow and get the sticks going because there's no reason to believe that the Jays don't have the offense to go out and do exactly that and rack up, that 5+ runs that tends to be the key to them oftentimes winning ball games.
yep. It'll be a good matchup. Logan Gilbert is a good pitcher. I would imagine that he is not long for the game, given that he, threw on Friday in relief. I believe it was 37 pitches. So yeah, it'll be a good time to try and get to that bullpen early and get to some of those guys that are the non-brash Munoz category for sure. All right. Well, that is going to do it for us here tonight at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening along on the audio provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jory is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEB_pod. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy game 2.